Welcome everybody! I'm reviewing every fan-made Pokemon game that I have ever played in my life with the help of a tier list. There's 50 entries to be exact, which means I've played over 50 different Pokemon games in my life. That sounds really sad when I say it out loud. There's one ROM hack that I count as 2 entries, but you will see why later in the video. Before I continue, tell me what your favorite ROM hack is in the comments below. With that out of the way, let's start with the first one. Pokemon Glazed is the very first ROM hack that I've ever played. My memory of it has faded over time, though I do remember that it was very well balanced and the overall polish was incredible for its time. I recently discovered that the game is still receiving updates, so who knows if the most recent version can get a better score. For now, it's a solid contender for the good tier. Oh, Radical Red. This is a very controversial game. People's opinions are split on this one, and so is mine. I've had 3 playthroughs of this game, every time on a different version. The first one was a normal mode playthrough, to cover the important fights on my channel. The second playthrough was somewhat of a turning point for my channel and myself because it made me look very differently at the AI of Pokemon. This is where I started to do those solo sweep videos that a lot of people seem to like. Though I just finished a 3rd playthrough on hardcore mode for the first time, and I just despise what Radical Red has turned into. They should call this Pokemon Boss Rush because of the obscene amount of important trainers that you have to face. In my last playthrough of normal mode, the game had around 40 bosses, including optional ones. The most recent version right now has doubled that amount and then some. I also dislike that they give a lot of important trainers legendary Pokemon with illegal moves. Erika, for example, has a permanent grass terrain and a Kartana with grassy slide, which is just insanely overpowered. If this game didn't have options to turn off EV grinding and other quality of life stuff like a portable PC, infinite rare candies and easy modification of Pokemon, I would have dropped hardcore mode instantly. Of course, I am playing with special rules for my videos, so other people can easily replicate my strategies, but if I had to grind full teams for every important trainer in this game, then I would have created a new tier under disliked with a picture of the run button. I'll put it in a good tier because I actually enjoyed my time with the normal difficulty somewhat, but I just cannot put hardcore difficulty any higher than below average. In my opinion, it's definitely not worth the title of best ROM hack, like many people claim it to be. Pokemon Inclement Emerald is very similar to Radical Red, but it feels a lot more fair. Besides being a difficulty ROM hack, it also adds a ton of side content that I really enjoyed exploring, so much so that I caught every legendary in the game. This game also has the best Pokédex in any Pokemon game and ROM hack. It has all of the information that you need about any Pokemon, as long as the player has obtained them. I did play this game by sweeping every important trainer, so I didn't have a proper team of 6 Pokemon to experience the game normally with, but even then, I enjoyed it way more than Radical Red. Definitely one of my favorite ROM hacks. Pokemon Altered or Pokemon Altered is a type swap ROM hack with completely new designs for every Pokemon it has. It plays like a fresh Pokemon game, yet it's very familiar because every Pokemon you know just has a different design and great ones at that. The team that makes the sprites these days are very talented. I can't give them enough credit. I really fell in love with the Dugtrio redesign. Look, it's sitting on a little cloud. Moreover, Pokemon Altered also redesigned some aspects of the Kanto region. There's more content to explore in the post-game. During my playthrough in early 2021, I noticed a few things that could use a bit of polishing, but it's likely that improvements have been added in more recent updates. Recently, a version of Altered released that increases the difficulty, so I will try that out when most of the sprites are finalized. Now that Altered has had its turn, let's get Amalga Magenta out of the way, since they're both made by the same team. I did a review of Amalga Magenta in full detail this year. It's a short ROM hack that gives the player a preview of what's in store for Pokemon Varia Blue. There are a few minor shortcomings, but the selection of Pokemon is delightful and well balanced. In the good tier it goes. Pokemon Blazing Emerald is one of my favorite hacks of all time. It just expands on the Horn region really well by introducing super solid regional forms, new evolutions, quality of life updates, new mechanics, new locations, and side content that breeds so much new life into the game. Some of the new Pokemon are a bit overpowered and some original home Pokemon are cut to free up space for new Pokemon, but that doesn't take away from the experience too much. This is my preferred Pokemon Emerald experience, but only slightly more than Inclement Emerald. Pokemon Bronze 2 is pretty much Pokemon Crystal at its core, but in two completely new regions, with its own stories and characters. I really liked this game and everything that is unique to it, but it was very easy. Easier than Pokemon Crystal. Just one example is that the game gives you access to Poliwag before the first gym leader, who's a ground type trainer. So you can just catch one, train it up a few levels and win by spamming Water Gun. Though I guess Crystal also did that with Onix and Geodude versus Falconer. Then later on, when you move on to the second region, everyone is very underleveled, until you reach the protagonist of the first game, Bronze. If the protagonist of the first game is named Bronze, it makes me wonder what we call the protagonist in the sequel. We can't call him Bronze 2 now, can we? Despite the difficulty holding it back, it's a lot of fun. To the good tier with you. Pokemon Cawps is quite unique. It's made by the same developer who made Pokemon Outlaw, a ROM hack I haven't played. When I first played it, I really liked the premise of this hack and the offensive, edgy humor it has. You play as a police agent in this game and get sent to various locations to do your job. The balancing is not great. Sometimes you're 5 levels below a boss and the final bosses are the icing on the cake in that department. It's not something for everyone, but again, it's one of a kind. Pokemon Crystal Clear. I played this one before the 2.0 version, before they added all of the customization options. I think this was the first open world experience in a fan-made Pokemon game, if I don't count those online games where you can start in any region. I really love that they gave all legendaries that were unobtainable in Vanilla Crystal their own questlines. Some of the existing ones even got expanded on. I also really liked the open world aspect of it. You can basically start from Kanto and work your way to Johto instead of the other way around. Though I think it has a major issue with how the gym leaders are handled. They increase in levels every time a badge is earned, but if you travel between gyms and fight every trainer, your Pokemon will be severely behind in levels after a while. This may be because I was able to beat gym leader after gym leader with good team building, but it forced me to grind EXP to catch up every once in a while. Ended up being more of a boss rush game, like a less tedious Radical Red. The final challenge against the Elite Four and Champion was kind of a letdown though. There are some first stage Pokemon sprinkled throughout their teams, which ends up feeling anticlimactic. I understand that these might be the favorite Pokemon of those OCs, but stuff like this should be kept as side content only, in my opinion. The gym leaders were a lot more challenging and satisfying to fight than the final 5 bosses. Despite some of the gripes I have with the game, it was a lot more fun than the majority of games on this list, so it definitely earned its spot in the great tier. Pokemon Clover is one of my favorite Fakemon ROM hacks. It did kick my ass on my first playthrough, but that's because I didn't know how to build a proper team. In my second playthrough, I was able to show that every boss is beatable by using one Pokemon, even without EV training sometimes. The Fakemon are the star of this game and I find most of them to be really well balanced. I didn't really care for the story and characters, except for it's somewhat your run-of-the-mill Pokemon story with some 4chan humor sprinkled on it, which isn't for everyone, but if you can look past that, it's a very fun Pokemon game just for the Fakemon alone. I recommend trying it out at the very least, especially if your humor is a bit on the edgy side. Pokemon Emerald Essence and Conversion Emerald are pretty straightforward type swap hacks. Not every Pokemon has gotten the type swap treatment in these games. The ones who did are sometimes recolored, not redesigned, like in Pokemon Altered. As a result, these ROM hacks may feel a bit lacking, but if you are really interested in type swap hacks, I'd say go ahead and give them a try. Pokemon Emerald Double Edition takes inspiration from the GameCube games and makes every battle a double battle. It also ups the difficulty a bit and adds quality of life updates from later generations. Surprisingly, there are new ways to obtain the Gen 1 and Gen 2 legendaries, which always scores an extra point for me. Because everything is a double battle, it gives a new perspective on building your team, which may lead you to use Pokemon that you would never use. Personally, it got slightly annoying to fight every random trainer in this format, but I've learned not to fight every single being that I encounter in these games. It's a great hack to try out if you're a fan of the GameCube games, but don't expect Shadow Pokemon to make an appearance. Oh man, Emerald Kaizo. I really disliked this game when I first played it. It was so different from the usual difficulty hack that I was used to. People online argue a lot that a Kaizo game is supposed to be frustrating, but I think that doesn't protect it from criticism. I do have to give the developer props for disabling EVs, because you're gonna be changing your team around a lot. I may like this game better today because I understand the game a lot more now after watching other people play it, but I forced myself through it back then and it has left a bad taste in my mouth ever since. Emerald Omega is heavily inspired by the Drayano hacks. Drayano is a ROM hack developer that's famous in the community for making enhancement hacks, with the goal of slightly increasing difficulty, making the entire national dex obtainable, adding quality of life updates and more. Omega Emerald is slightly more difficult than a Drayano hack, but not as difficult as, let's say, Inclement Emerald. I really recommend this hack and any hack made by Drayano. They're the definitive ways for replaying the 2D Pokemon games, in my opinion. Emerald Omega and FireRed Omega may feel a bit outdated by now compared to more recent hacks though. Now, speaking of Drayano hacks, I only played FireRed Omega and Renegade Platinum, and FireRed Omega is very similar to Emerald Omega, but it is quite easy compared to it. It's also one of the first ROM hacks I've played many years ago, so I can't add more commentary to it than what I said about Emerald Omega. Renegade Platinum was made a few years later than those two, so Drayano had a lot more experience under his belt and it shows. It has extra content for the main story and 99% of it feels very natural. If you have never played Pokemon Platinum or you want to replay it, just play Renegade Platinum instead. There are even mods for Renegade Platinum, like speeding up the game engine and following Pokemon. Hell, there are even people building off of Renegade Platinum to make their own ROM hacks. Drayano's hacks are the definitive ways to experience the Gen 3, 4 and 5 games if you're looking for a majorly improved vanilla experience. Pokemon Ephemerald is another type swap hack, similar to Altered. It follows the structure and mechanics of Vanilla Emerald with a bit of extra content. So that means there's no physical special split and no moves from later generations. The difficulty is upped a bit and a lot of Pokemon actually have a good dual typing to use offensively. So I appreciate the work put into balancing out these new Pokemon. You can also hunt every legendary up to Gen 3, but not through new events or anything. The ones that aren't available in the vanilla version are now randomly spread throughout the Hoenn region, most of them behind dive spots. It's definitely a better experience than Conversion Emerald and Emerald Essence. Pokemon Smash or Pass is a Pokemon Emerald ROM hack that was made after the YouTuber Markiplier uploaded a Smash or Pass video of every Pokemon that existed at the time. So every Pokemon that Markiplier finds smashable is made available in the game and spread throughout the Hoenn region for players to smash. I mean catch. That means the Pokédex is limited to at least 80 catchable Pokemon, while the rest of the game is Vanilla Emerald with updated mechanics. I had a decent time with it, it's nothing too special. Pokemon Emerald Trashlocke is similar in concept to Pokemon Smash or Pass, but it only leaves Pokemon in the game that are considered trash. You would think that it makes the game very hard, but then they leave in Pokemon like Electrode, Pelipper and Grumpig, who may be considered outclassed, but they are by no means trash. There is a FireRed version that takes this to the extreme, but I haven't played it yet. I find it slightly better than Pokemon Smash or Pass because it made me appreciate some weaker Pokemon that I would never consider using otherwise. It's in the same tier as Smash or Pass, but I find it slightly better than that ROM hack. Pokemon Fakemon FireRed is a notable Fakemon game that I quite enjoyed. In addition to adding the Fairy type, it introduces two unique types, Digital and Cosmic. The quality of the sprites is all over the place. The difficulty is very similar to the original FireRed in the early to mid game, but that gets thrown out of the window when you get access to Mega Evolutions. Just like X and Y, you will curb stomp every trainer that you come across from then on. I've also had a Cosmic Electric type named Conductric. That was pretty much unstoppable with its 145 base speed and 120 special attack. That is just my experience with the game though. It might be possible that other players had a harder time because of the Fakemon that are in their team. Finally, from what I remember, the region is also identical, but I can't say for sure. Players who are really into Fakemon hacks will feel right at home here. It's good enough to be in the above average tier. Pokemon Fool's Gold is, I think, the first Gen 2 type swap ROM hack. It's similar in quality compared to Altered in terms of new designs for every Pokemon. Though I'd say that Fool's Gold takes a different approach with their redesigns. They're not afraid to crank up the weirdness for some of these, and sometimes they're even somewhat disturbing. This ROM hack also expands on the Johto region by adding new dungeons, towns and areas that fit in quite well. What I have talked about now was stuff available in the 1.1 version of Fool's Gold, the version that I played 2 or 3 years ago. Nowadays it has the physical special split implemented and the entirety of Generations 3 Pokédex, along with some cross-gen evolutions, regional forms and some extras. There's even a third region in this game that only has been added in the latest version. I had a lot of fun with the 1.1 version, but I never played past the Johto region because back then I knew the game was still being worked on, and I'm glad I've had the patience to wait. There have been a ton of improvements made to this ROM hack since then, and I want to play through it again when 1.4 releases, so I hope that's soon. I'll put the 1.1 version in heavily recommended. Who knows if the more recent release will put this game in the highest tier. As we all know, Pokemon Gaia is one of the best Pokemon ROM hacks ever made. Except I don't think it is. I'm sorry, I found it quite boring and easy, except for like 2 fights I didn't properly prepare for. I originally dropped this game twice and had to force myself through the latter half. If you're into completely new regions and stories, then try it out. But it didn't click with me personally. It does make me wonder why similar ROM hacks like Glazed and Prism feel really fun to play, but Gaia doesn't. At least it did scratch an itch for wanting a new Pokemon game at the time, but I probably won't replay it. Pokemon Grand Colosseum and XG Next Gen are both GameCube hacks of Pokemon Colosseum and Pokemon XD Gale of Darkness respectively. They're both enhancement hacks that increase the difficulty, add the physical special split, the Fairy type, moves, mechanics and abilities from Gen 7. XG even goes the extra mile and makes almost every Pokemon up to Gen 3 available. So team building options for these double battles are incredibly varied. You can compare XG to Gianos hacks. They're very similar in terms of improvements. Pokemon Grand Colosseum shares most of the changes with Pokemon XG, but I think it is limited to the original structure of Pokemon Colosseum much more, so it cannot add more shadow Pokemon than originally intended. I think there is also a move reminder missing in Grand Colosseum, or I just didn't find it, which was very frustrating because you are limited to a small selection of Pokemon, so changing moves around for those few Pokemon is a necessity. I can see myself doing a second playthrough of Pokemon XG with a completely different team, and while I enjoyed Grand Colosseum a lot, I think I would end up using the same few Pokemon because they were just that good. If you were to play both of these hacks, play Pokemon Grand Colosseum first and then Pokemon XG. I don't recommend playing them in reverse order. Pokemon Insurgence is the first fan game that I have ever completed and also the first one that I covered on the channel. I played it on hard mode, which felt stupidly difficult back then, but if I managed to get through it when I was less experienced, I probably wouldn't have too much trouble with it now. It takes place in a huge new region and there's a second one to explore in the post-game with its own story, but I've never played it that far. The story in the main game is just goddamn insane. At one point you basically travel through dimensions to stop multiple cults that worship legendary Pokemon. It's quite edgy, but at least it kept my attention the whole time. The game has something similar to regional forms, called Delta forms. They were introduced before regional forms were a thing in the official games. There's a lot of side content, with a majority of it centered around Delta Pokemon. I think it's worth a try for any Pokemon fan, even if the story is not your thing. Pokemon Liquid Crystal is a remake of Pokemon Crystal in the FireRed engine. It adds some side content, new characters and an expanded storyline on top of the main game, which gives the Johto region a bit more of an identity. But it feels so unnecessary at the same time. Some Pokemon's move pools were also broken, I think. For example, the Heracross I used could learn Dragon Claw for some reason. The game is also so much easier than Vanilla Crystal, and I feel like this is partially to blame to a majority of trainers being stuck with Gen 2 movesets, while I get to use Dragon Dance or Calm Mind in combination with recovery moves and insane coverage. I think the correct word to label this game with is unpolished. Man, that would have actually been an amazing pun to make with Pokemon Polished Crystal, but at least that game is good. I did play this a few years ago, so hopefully it has received a few updates to improve the experience. From what I've played, it goes to the lowest tier. Pokemon Nameless FireRed is a difficulty ROM hack of Pokemon FireRed, and it is the worst one I have ever played. Maybe it's coincidental, but the Pokemon I used got straight up terrible level up moves. My Chandler could not learn Shadow Ball, Greninja couldn't learn Ice Beam or Dark Pulse, Electros was stuck with Wild Charge and other physical moves. My only decent Pokemon was a Gyarados that you can buy as a Magikarp. It learns Dragon Dance and a few good physical moves. Boss trainers also had EV trained Pokemon and competitive items, while I was stuck with simple items that boosted one type by 20% and I had no proper ways to EV train myself. This game will be put at the very bottom of my most disliked ROM hacks and will probably stay there too. Pokemon Polished Crystal and Pokemon Red++ are two ROM hacks that I played a very long time ago, and for some reason I don't remember anything from them. I have both games registered on my How Long to Beat account and I gave them an 8 out of 10, so I'll put them in the grey tier. I did look up what other people think and they seem to be solid ROM hacks. Pokemon Polished Crystal has received a 3.0 update recently and Red++'s last update was half a year ago. Pokemon Prism was a long-awaited Pokemon Crystal ROM hack when it released, and you can put released in quotation marks. The game was actually leaked by one of the contributors, because the Pokemon Company had issued a DMCA strike when the game was close to being released. Why this ROM hack in particular was targeted is still unknown to this day, I think. So an earlier build of the game had leaked, which contained a nearly finished game. I really enjoyed what I played back then, and I can vividly remember those sections where you had to solve puzzles or requests from wild Pokemon by playing as one of your party members. I can't recall a lot of the new region where the game takes place, so that probably means it was good, knowing myself. If it was bad, I would have remembered. It has a few Fakemon legendaries that were well hidden and a lot of Pokemon from beyond Gen 2, all of them having an animation when they enter a battle. They are way more fluid than the ones from Game Freak. I read somewhere that the developers are working on the game again after many years, so fingers crossed that nothing goes wrong for this new version. I really want to play through it again one day. Pokemon Pyrite is a difficulty hack of Pokemon Crystal. It doesn't only increase the difficulty, but also changes the flow of the region and adds neat little changes that enhance the overall experience. I really like, for example, that you cannot leave a gym until the gym leader is defeated. Normally the game opens up when you reach Akrutiak City. The path you take from there on is actually streamlined to a set one. This clearly helped to fix the otherwise bad difficulty balance of the original game. I really wish this hack was more known. It has barely any coverage on YouTube and the Poké community page only has 4 pages of comments. To the great tier with you. Theta Emerald X falls under a genre of Pokemon ROM hacks that personally don't appeal to me, but many people seem to love having every single Pokemon encounterable in one game. It makes every Pokemon up to Gen 7 available, which obviously makes the game very bloated. It's been a couple of years since I've played it, but the first word that pops up in my mind is boring when I think back on it. And over the years it's also been labeled as unpolished. I guess I did enjoy it more than Liquid Crystal though. I played Pokemon Unbound on Expert mode first and dropped it halfway through the playthrough because it was getting too difficult with the Pokemon I wanted to use. I picked it up again and made the illogical choice to play it on Insane mode because I had just finished solo sweeping every boss battle in Radical Red. I felt inspired and confident after such a feat, and somehow I managed to do the same in this game's hardest difficulty. Luckily, Pokemon Unbound introduced me to the concept of a sandbox mode, which only added to my enjoyment of the game. I was so relieved that I didn't need to grind EVs to experiment with solo sweeping. It's just too bad that the post-game is blocked off if you play in this mode. I've seen people argue that it's cheating, but I don't agree. The only reason I did a whole playthrough in sandbox mode was to save time experimenting with Pokemon, which allowed me to upload videos more frequently. You still have to beat every trainer fair and square with legal Pokemon. You're just skipping the grinding, but it's the choice of the devs. If I want to experience the post-game now, I just need to copy my strategies, but I honestly don't know if it's worth my time. Besides that, the region is very large and has a lot to offer besides the main plot. Speaking of the story, it's okay. You're basically on a hunt after the evil team all the time. The plot is pretty much centered around them. It just gets annoying after a while because you're winning most of the time in the plot, and every single time something happens that enables the bad guys to get away, or the main character just gets transported to a different location. The game conveniently uses this scenario many times. Story aside, I heavily recommend it. Try the game on difficulty first though. I don't remember too much from Solar Light and Lunar Dark, besides looking beautiful, being well balanced and having very solid Fakemon. I didn't have any complaints about the game. It's just straight up a good run-of-the-mill Pokemon fan game. If you want to play in a new Fakemon region, this is your game. Pokemon Uranium was the first fan game that I've ever played, but I never managed to finish it. If I remember correctly, I only played up to the part after defeating the 6th gym leader. It has everything a mainline Pokemon game has. A mix of all the new Pokemon, cross-gen evolutions, a new region, mega evolutions, a gimmick with the new nuclear types. The story is pretty unique, but I won't spoil it. I did watch 1 or 2 playthroughs on YouTube, and it makes me want to pick up the game again one day. It's also been received very well by the community on all aspects, so based on my observations, Pokemon Uranium appears to be a great fan game. Pokemon Fusion 3 is just Vanilla Emerald but with fusions, and really good ones at that. The sprite work is amazing, there is nothing more to say about it, it's just really fun to play with the new options available. I can apply everything that I said about Fusion 3 to Pokemon Fused Dimensions, but this one is a FireRed ROM hack instead of an Emerald ROM hack. Fused Dimensions is more up to date with Gen 7 mechanics though, so it has the edge over Fusion 3. The only negative point I have is the power balance between Pokemon. Some regular Pokemon have over 700 BST, and I can tell from experience that they are way too overpowered. It was fun to mess around with, but for the sake of the game, it's luckily going to be fixed in a future update. My Pokemon Emerald Genesis playthrough felt decent. It's been a while since I played it, and my most vivid memory is that Wes makes a few appearances. It does have similar side content compared to Blazing Emerald, and it takes some clues from it too, like sprite tiles and unique features, so that means I'm supposed to like this hack a lot. It's just, I can't remember much from it. I'll put it in above average, though something tells me the ROM hack is better than that. Pokemon Omega Red, not to be confused with Pokemon FireRed Omega, reminds me a lot of Theta Emerald X, in that every Pokemon up to Gen 7 is available to catch, but this game has significantly improved overall graphically. It also has a shit ton of legendary Pokemon to hunt, in often newly made or expanded locations. I feel like there is more effort put into this than Theta Emerald, so I have to put it in a higher tier. But I still dislike ROM hacks that only make every Pokemon catchable and not do something to make weaker Pokemon more unique. Radical Red and Inclement Emerald prove that it's somewhat possible to differentiate every Pokemon, though Radical Red goes even more overboard with the amount of Pokemon available. Somehow, Star Beasts was really enjoyable. It's Pokemon Red with a Fakemon dex, the Dark and Steel typing, and all of the Gen 1 shenanigans on top of that. It has really cool looking monsters, even though there are a select few that are a bit weird. Some of the monsters are inspired by or come straight from another game,
虚空星兽
or Spacetime Star Beast when translated to English. It may not be for everyone because it's a Gen 1 game, but I think it's worth trying out for every Fakemon lover out there. I am actually not sure if I properly finished Flora Sky, but I really started to hate the game halfway through. The balancing is horrible and I didn't know where to go at many points. Some of the Pokemon sprites were badly implemented and the dialogue was full of mistakes. I don't have much more to say about it, so it's pretty clear where it goes. Kanlara Ultimate is pretty weird. It introduces demon forms for specific Pokemon, similar to Mega Evolutions, but they're more like dark permanent evolutions. There are a few drastic difficulty spikes like the second gym leader having, and please believe me, a Pelipper with the Drizzle and a Thundurus with Thunder. The 6th gym leader has a Dialga and the champion challenges you with several demon legendaries, including the one and only demon god. Besides the difficulty spikes, the game has a ton of side content and a new region to explore, but don't expect to be blown away by the story. There was also this one infuriating puzzle where you had to get past a ton of guards, like you were playing Metal Gear Solid.
What's wrong? Snake! Snake!
I did like the game, but the negative aspects were always massive time wasters. I recognize the effort put into Kanlara Ultimate, so I will put it in the above average tier. I never finished Light Platinum because the game is so brain dead easy and you get way too many Pokemon to catch at the beginning of the game. I am baffled that some people consider this to be the greatest ROM hack of all time. It's too bad that the first few hours of this game are such a slog, because the new region made for this ROM hack looks beautiful. I played Pokemon Moon Black 2 up to the 8th gym and then I bought a new phone, completely forgetting about it. I guess it has a few worthwhile selling points like animated Pokemon from later generations, characters from Gen 7 and Unovian forms. It was pretty decent but had some difficulty spikes. I'll either pick it up again from my old save file or start anew one day. You know, I enjoyed Snakewood a little bit, but it's such a mess on all fronts. Story, balancing, polish. Apparently there's some sort of remake in development, but it hasn't gained much traction yet and updates are far and few between. This is a very bad ROM hack and some might consider it to be a good kind of bad, but I disagree. If it piques your interest, give it a try. But don't even look up what the game is about, just do a blind playthrough. Pokemon Black and White 3 is a worthy remake sequel to the second game. This is one of the most beautiful Pokemon Crystal ROM hacks. Just take a look at the town you start in. The game is almost perfectly balanced, even though I had some trouble with a few bosses. But I think that was more of a problem with my team building rather than the balancing itself. I had some Pokemon that evolved very late, or I had a EXP growth rate that made my Pokemon level up very slowly. I personally think that the story isn't as good as the first two games because Team Plasma is rehashed again as the main villains and the story revolves around them, though the story did get interesting halfway through the game when their goal was slowly getting revealed. I found that it gets a bit disturbing if you think about it long enough, but I won't spoil that here. It's not quite there to be one of my favorite ROM hacks, but I still heavily recommend this game. The original Pokemon Vega. This is not the minus version that makes the game more bearable. While it adds Fakemon to the game and takes place in a new region, they won't distract me from the major issues this ROM hack has. The early game is brutally hard because the gym leaders have Pokemon that are insanely strong. Grinding in the early game is also non-existent since every wild Pokemon is 10 levels below your team. The mid to late game is fine, your Pokemon finally get access to better moves and stats, but I wouldn't even have made it that far without abusing rare candies. So I think that the original version of Pokemon Vega deserves to be in the below average tier, simply because of the horrible balancing issues that are present so early in a playthrough. If you want to play this game, I've heard that the Vega minus version fixes almost every issue from the original hack. The final fan-made game is upon us. Pokemon Emerald Rogue is the 50th entry and the latest ROM hack I've been playing. I've been switching between a few roguelike games like RoboQuest, Enter the Gungeon and Gunfire Reborn. It's a new genre of games for me and I'm having such a blast with them. Now there's a ROM hack that takes the roguelike element and slaps it onto a Pokemon game, one of my favorite franchises. It took me a long time to try it out, but I was immediately hooked after one playthrough, and it only took a while to try a few more runs. I need to put this game at the top of the list just because you get a new experience every time and the replay value of the game is simply infinite. Okay, I want to rearrange a few entries now, so see you after the cut. This is the final version of my tier list. Pokemon Emerald Rogue takes the first place and Pokemon Nameless FireRed is the worst ROM hack I've played. I don't think there are too many controversial opinions. Let me know if you disagree with me on any entries and let's have a civil discussion in the comments with each other. It's time for me to go. Don't forget to like the video and please subscribe to my channel. I hope you have a good one.